Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard Moglen. Welcome back to our stock market outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. And starting with the Nasdaq in MarketSmith, you can see that we had a very strong week continuing up and overall held this level strongly and had a very good bullish outside day on this Friday to end the week, closing in on this 14,000 level and getting a little bit closer to previous all-time highs. And overall, you can see a nice kind of higher low here at this swing low. And the only really slight drawback here is we do have some gaps that potentially could get filled in the future. But kind of my expectation maybe is a little bit of consolidation and then a retest of this previous all-time high right here. I don't think this gap will be filled, but obviously you have to keep that in mind and be open to all the different possibilities. Going over to the S&P 500, this index has been leading, and last week we continued higher. You can see finishing strongly at all-time highs. Volume is a little bit lower on both the S&P 500 and also on the Nasdaq this past week. So that's one thing to consider. But overall, things look great. We're in a strong uptrend and very close to the 21 EMA, breaking above a rising 50-day moving average, which could start another power trend like we saw back here and back here. So in terms of the indexes, things look good. And now moving on to potential new leadership, there's a few groups that I'm seeing emerge here. We've got, of course, the semiconductors that have been very, very strong. I've got AMAT, LRCX, and SMH in general on this list. We've also got some social media companies. We've got Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook has been very, very strong. And also Pinterest has been very strong within this space and moving out the right-hand side. And then in terms of fintech, we've also got representation from UPST, SQ. You can see a huge amount of volume coming in here. A very powerful move up this right-hand side. And overall, those are kind of the three leading groups that I see emerging. We'll see what happens as this uptrend matures. But in terms of leadership groups, semiconductors, social media, and also fintech are one of my key focuses. We've also got some smattering of other stocks in here. RH, which has been strong, SE, and Zim. Those have all been very, very strong, but not potentially in a leading group, which would just add to the probability of them really working out. But overall, going through these charts, let's start with AMAT. This broke out 2 weeks ago and really consolidated nicely this week, tightening within this range. If you go to a weekly chart, this did make a new high, which is one drawback. But overall, just looking at this daily, you can see it's just getting tighter and tighter and looks potentially like it'll let this 10-day moving average, this pale blue line here, catch up and then potentially resume the uptrend. And we'll see what happens. Volatility is decreasing and looks very, very strong. Facebook showed a lot of RS coming out of this longer term base. Let's draw that line in here and overall consolidating nicely on Thursday and Friday on lower volume. And you can see the RS line has been increasing since this kind of swing low in early March. LRCX, you can see, also broke out a few weeks ago and consolidated nicely, going sideways this past week, holding that 4 EMA and looks poised for higher prices. These last 3 days were on well below average volume and volatility is decreasing nicely. Pins a super powerful move off this consolidation pivot breakout and also this kind of intermediate term pivot. And what I'm looking for is if it can kind of go sideways for a week, similar to what AMAT and LRCX are doing, and form a little bit of a handle within this overall base and kind of form a cup and handle. That's what I'm watching for. RH consolidating nicely, strong move as well on this Friday, although it was on lower volume. But once again, after this breakout, it's consolidating nicely, going sideways, and there's no real sellers whatsoever, which is a very good sign. SAM continues to move upward from its breakout, a little bit whippy here and not the tightest base, but overall big volume on the breakout, and it's riding that 4 EMA to higher prices. SE, like SQ and a few others, very strong move up this right-hand side, and we'll see if it can go sideways, form a kind of cheat entry here below this pivot at 258.6. SMH looks similar to really a lot of semiconductor stocks, obviously, and overall is forming a cup and handle here. We can see this point, the high is at 257.54, so we'll see if that can work out. And overall, this is a pretty tight handle, so if you want a way to play the semiconductors, this is definitely an option. And you could also play this using SOXL, which is obviously going to be a little bit more volatile because it is 3x the normal move. and this handle depth here is around 7%, and the standard pivot would be 45.3. And next up, we've got Snapchat, which is moving very strongly up this right-hand side. You've got a 3-bar break and consolidation pivot breakout here on this Wednesday, 331, and retaking the 50 SMA. And I'm watching to see if it can consolidate, pull back here below this pivot, and that's at 65.13. A great volume coming in as well, so we'll see what this can do. And volatility decreasing a little bit this past Friday. SQ as well, super powerful move up the right-hand side, similar chart, and it did retake this pivot at 252.5, and we'll see if it can kind of pause here, form out a handle before challenging these all-time highs. But look at this volume coming in here on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's not retail buying. That's definitely institutions accumulating shares. Twitter as well in the social media space, double bottom base here, pausing at this pivot, which is at 71.86, and we'll see if it can form out here a few days and then challenge that key level. I love the accumulation signs earlier on during this uptrend, and it's pausing right under this kind of previous all-time high that set all the way back in 2013 at 63.65, so that's also a very relevant level to consider. Next up, we've got UPST, which is flagging out here and holding that anchored VWAP from that earnings gap up on this Friday. If we go to a 65-minute chart, you can see a super strong move here after undercutting these lows, and then a little bit of selling to end the day, but overall very strong. And going back to the daily, you can see this was a pocket pivot, so we'll see if it can move back up and challenge this descending trend line. And a lot of people tried this on Monday and were stopped out. In my mind, it is a little bit too short of a descending trend line to be actionable, but definitely you've got this kind of longer term one to watch, and also this one now on the bottom. So if you're a fan of trend lines, you can draw those in. And lastly, we've got Zim, which had a strong breakout on this Thursday, and then beautiful action here, retesting this prior pivot, and this high was at 28.78. And once again, pocket pivot volume signatures on Thursday and Friday as well. So in terms of new leadership, these are kind of the names that I'm focused on. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any more suggestions of names I should add to this list, or overall groups that I should be focused on as well. Moving on, let's go through the charts of the old leaders quickly and see how they're shaping up. We've got apps, which is tightening up a little bit on this right-hand side. You've got a pivot here at 89.77. It's back above all those key moving averages. So a slight pullback here, down here would present a pretty good low risk, high reward opportunity. CELH retook this key volume level, is acting well, but is stuck below the 50 SMA for now. But a nice strong move on this Thursday on volume, a pocket pivot here, and volatility is decreasing, as you can see down here. Corsair pulling back on low relative volume, tightening up a little bit. You've got the anchor VWAP here from this significant day, and we'll see how it acts at this key level. This is pretty deep within this base, and this is about 40%, and this level is at 35%. So this is very early. There's no need to push it, even if you're interested in this name, before it really gets up here and challenges these previous all-time highs. CrowdStrike moving up quite well the right-hand side, but still a little bit far from all-time highs, 20%. We'll see if it can kind of move sideways here, consolidate below this pivot at 210.88, but it is nice that it retook that key 200 level, and I believe they just announced a partnership with Amazon, which could be quite good for the business. EMPH, a slower name, just right now in a downtrend, no real shape here. And as a lot of stocks were just going sideways last week, you can see from the RS line that this is actually decreasing and acting worse than the overall market. ETHE back above the 50 SMA, and a strong move on Thursday and a strong follow-on day on Friday on volume, so that's good to see. And we'll see if we can challenge and break above this kind of consolidation area. And this high is at 224, this high is at 228, and this is at 231.34. So this area has been kind of a problem here for ETHE to overcome, but we'll see if it can finally do so on volume. EXPI, once again, in a downtrend below the 21 EMA, doesn't look actionable at this point, and this is a quite deep base at about 54%. So Not really on my radar too much. Next up, we've got FFTY, and overall it was actionable on this day right here on this Thursday, the 8th, as it broke this very short descending trend line, and it was also an inside day and up, breaking above this high, and also a 3-bar break breaking above this high as well. And then on Friday, a nice consolidation day, and you've got a standard pivot here at 164.5. Fiverr forming a little bit of a cheat area here within the space, and you've got this pivot at 232.26 and also this pivot at 252 flat to deal with, and it is below a 50 SMA. So keep that in mind. This needs a little bit of work. This is pretty low within the space. This would be a low cheat from Mark Minervini. GRWG back above the 50 SMA, strong breakout like FFTY on this Thursday, and then once again a nice consolidation day on below average volume, so this is potentially actionable. And you've got a standard pivot here at 52.86 and also kind of this area here with this high being at 59.32. Nets forming once again a nice low cheat. We'll see if this can push through, and also the 50 SMA in the coming weeks. NEO still below a declining 21 EMA and 50 SMA, and you can see very low within this space. You can see it's still at about 40%. So a lot of work to do and not the greatest shape at this moment. Pins very strong. We already talked about it. PLTR still needs work, although it did have a nice day on this Friday and also this Thursday, and it is tightening up a little bit on this right-hand side. But once again, very far from all-time highs, a lot of overhead supply to deal with, so it's not top of my list. Peloton, promising move here. You can see it broke out above this pivot at 119.12, and it had a consolidation day on this Friday, although it did close below the pivot, which is one drawback. But overall, I like the volume coming in here, but it is still dealing with the 50 SMA. Next up, we've got Roku, a strong move the past 2 weeks, and you can see great volume coming in here along the right-hand side, and we'll see if it can kind of go sideways here and break above this pivot and the 50 SMA. SE, nice move up the right-hand side, holding that 4 EMA back above the 50 SMA, and I'm watching to see if it can kind of form out a handle here and present a good kind of standard pivot here at 258.6. Shopify moving up at the right-hand side of its base above this key level, and that pivot was at 1,190. And once again, we had a nice breakout on Thursday and a nice move recapturing the 50 SMA on this Friday as well. SQ, we already covered it. TDOC doesn't look great, still basically near the bottom of the space here, and there's a lot of big red bars here indicating distribution to me, although it is holding near this level at around 169 to 180. So it is holding that for now. Volume is drying up a little bit, so if it can make a nice move above this anchored VWAP and the 21 EMA, that could be the start of a next uptrend, but it has a lot of work to do as it is about 40% deep within the space, and this still looks to me like the basically the start of a rounded bottom where this would be the left side rounded bottom, and you might need a few more weeks to basically work up the right-hand side of this base. Tesla, you can see, formed a higher low here and is pulling back on below average volume, tightening up a little bit on this right-hand side, but it is still below a declining 50-day SMA, and it is about 23% from these previous all-time highs. TSM, you can see, is forming up the right-hand side, potential low cheat here with a standard pivot at either this close, which was at 124.8, or you could use this high at 127.4, but it is still below a declining 50 SMA. Twilio moving up the right-hand side here, double bottom potentially, and it still needs to work through the 50 SMA and these prior pivots at around 388.91. Twitter, we already covered, Upwork, forming a potential low cheat here, a standard pivot around the 49.6, 50 area. And lastly, we've got ZS, which is still very low within its base, but is forming a little bit of a right side. And maybe if it goes sideways, then breaks out above this high at 187.17 and above these highs, that could start another uptrend, and the right side of the space could start to really get defined. So overall, some of these are acting stronger than others. Apps above all those key moving averages. Pins we are talking about. SE strong as well. SQ. Those are really my focus. The ones that have already moved strongly off the bottoms and are potentially forming out handles. That's kind of the ones that I'm focused on rather than a kind of TDOC or a NEO, where they still need a lot of time before they would shape up. And especially TDOC, you've got a lot of signs of distribution here during this left side, and volume is just starting to dry up at the bottom. So that's kind of a take on the old leaders. We'll see some of them recover and lead potentially, but some of them won't continue to perform as strongly as they did in 2020. So moving on, let's talk about the indexes and go through the QQQ day by day. And starting with this Monday, a very strong move up after a retest of these prior highs here on Friday and also the close. And then a very strong close here, overall up 2%. Then a nice consolidation day on this Tuesday and Wednesday. Then another gap up and a strong close. And Friday, a gap down, but once again, a very strong close. So overall, you can see there's kind of a character change back here within this choppiness. We would gap up, close right near the lows, while here we even gap down, close near the highs, or if we do gap up, we continue on upwards. So overall, very strong action. I wouldn't be surprised if we really form out a handle here, potentially fill this gap before challenging these all-time highs, but overall, the QQQ looks very, very strong. And going over to a weekly chart, you can see overall a very strong week, up 3.86% with a daily closing range on Friday of 95%, weekly closing range at 98%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are above a rising 10 and 30 week. And so we are in a strong stage 2 uptrend. Moving on to the SPY, overall continued on into all-time highs and was up 2.72% with a daily closing range on Friday of 95%, weekly closing range of 98% like the QQQ. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, but I wouldn't be surprised if we had a nice consolidation week. And overall, we're in a nice stage 2 uptrend. And looking at the IWM, you can see this wasn't quite as strong as the other two major indexes because large caps are doing quite well this time. And overall, this was actually down 0.51% with a daily closing range on Friday of 73%, a weekly closing range of 44%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. Looking at SMH, you can see overall nice upside reversal action, and you can see we were overall up 1.24% with a daily closing range on Friday of 100%, weekly closing range of 77%, and the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. Looking at the VIX, we continue to take out these lows below a declining 10 and 30-week moving average. Ethereum shaping up nicely in a potential VCP and a strong move this past week, up 8.67% with a daily closing range on Friday of 98%, weekly closing range of 92%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And looking at Bitcoin, this is consolidating nicely against the 10-week moving average. Overall, it was down 2.39%, but it had a daily closing range on Friday of 28%, weekly closing range of 40%, and overall the expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a nice stage 2 uptrend. I actually like how this is shaping up here after this kind of very strong uptrend. And lastly, we've got the FFTY, and overall this is continuing to build out the right-hand side here after a potential kind of double bottom base, although this low was higher than this low. But overall, very strong action, up 2%, and day closing range on Friday was 84%, weekly closing range was 94%. The expectation from this bar is sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend at this point. So that's pretty much it from the indexes. Definitely powerful moves this past week, but they are definitely a little bit short-term extended, and there are some gaps in here that could be filled during the next few weeks. So moving on to my focus list, if we sort by that weekly change, you can see that SI and Orgo were our strongest performers, and you can see Orgo had a nice breakout above this high. All this is kind of a shorter term consolidation, so I actually wouldn't be too surprised given the kind of weak close here if it pulls back to the top, at least consolidates for a bit, and then continues to move higher. But overall, SI right near this pivot at 164, a nice base forming here, higher lows, BCP characteristics, and there is this kind of declining trend line here, which is at about 168.50. Moving on, we already talked about Orgo. LDI finally broke out of this tight consolidation here and had a pretty good move on this Friday on above average volume. This was a pocket pivot. SLQT, pretty volatile here this past week. It had a nice retest and re-breakout on this Monday, but had a pretty bad bar here ending right near the lows on Wednesday, then a kind of consolidation day, and then a gap up and pretty strong close here on this Friday. And this down bar here does give me a little bit of pause, but it was on lower volume. So we'll see what happens. This is called the turbulence zone for a reason, right near these prior IPO all-time highs. Next up, we've got Roblox, and overall a nice move on this Monday here with a pocket pivot volume signature. Actually tried it off the retest here and move up above this high, but I was actually stopped out on this day for a small gain, and overall it recovered well, and I actually tried it again over this high and have a very small gain at this point, so we'll see what happens. I don't like this close, but potentially a wick setup into next week. I like how it's forming out this IPO base. FFTY, we already covered, looks pretty strong. GM retesting the pivot, moving up and consolidating on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday with a nice inside day to end the week. And this pullback is on below average volume, looks pretty good. Copen shook me out as well, took a small loss and then a small gain on this one. But overall, definitely very volatile right near this 11.59 up to 11.65 level. A lot of downside reversals. This one on pretty high volume. And overall, not for the faint-hearted. This is a kind of faster mover in the chip space. PII consolidating nicely, pulling back and tightening along this pivot here on below average volume, getting pretty tight on this right-hand side. So this is a pivot here at 139.47. IR going sideways, and BLD, nice move on this Friday after a nice upside reversal on Thursday. And you can see pocket pivot volume here coming in on this Friday as it broke out above this high at 218.85. QB still going sideways here. Nice upside reversal action on this Thursday. Bumble, unfortunately, losing this tightness here and a pretty bad bar here, a 3-bar break to the downside on this Friday. Airbnb also a pretty bad bar on this Wednesday. It shook me out, unfortunately, for a small loss. Lyft pulling back to 50 SMA, and you can see a nice kind of upside reversal here on this Friday, even though it was a down day. And I'll be watching to see if it can kind of continue to find support here near these lows, which are at 59.54, and also this kind of 50 SMA 10-week area. And lastly, we've got X, which was our worst performer. Really broke expectations here, breaking below this prior pivot level on volume, and looks like it just kind of re-entered the base and needs time. But overall, this isn't really a stock that I'm focused on now, given that a lot of growth stocks are back to working and forming tight consolidations. So overall, a pretty good week here. Most of our stocks were gains. You can see 12 out of the 17 were green, 2 over 10% gainers, and a bunch near 5% as well. And moving on to sentiment, you can see that from my most recent Twitter survey, we're at 54.4% bullish, a drop from this previous week, but still reasonably elevated. But I think that's normal given we're so close to a fall through day, and also there's been very strong action recently. Looking at the put call ratio, there's actually going up, although it did kind of pull back this past week and retest kind of this area where it's been for really the past 3-4 months or so. Looking at the bulls versus bears poll, this is going up once again above 60. One reason to be a little bit more cautious in the short term. And looking at the name exposure index, this is increasing back up to 89.85. So sentiment a little bit short term overheated, but that's normal given the very strong action from the leading names and the overall market. Moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, they discuss a lot of the strong action. The headline is stock market shrugs off inflation data, rising bond yields, Dow, S&P 500, Nasdaq 100 score all-time closing highs. And reading through, they discuss the strong action and nice upside reversal on the Nasdaq 100. They discuss how the distribution days have been completely wiped off the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq, which is a good sign. Honeywell, UNH help lift the Dow Jones. Some other stocks doing well in the IBD home builders group, as we saw from BLD as well. Nasdaq challenging those or approaching those all-time highs, and the large caps doing well as well. Facebook, Microsoft, and Google all look very, very strong. Retail stocks also doing well, FND and BKE. AMAT, LRCX are continuing to hold those gains nicely, as we saw from the charts. And finally, they also talk about UPST, which absorbed that offering of 2 million shares pretty well and closed well on this past Friday. So overall, their current outlook is a confirmed uptrend, no distribution days on the Nasdaq or S&P 500. And moving on to the Wishing Well blog, you can see the GMI signal is green since April 5th, and the GMI score is a 6 out of 6 on this Friday. So overall, my current view is a confirmed uptrend. We saw a lot of positive action from the indexes and leading stocks the past 2 weeks. We are a little bit short-term extended, which is something to consider. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those gaps, especially the most recent ones, fill a little bit. But overall, I am looking to increase my exposure and position in potential leadership quality stocks. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys in future videos.